NASS's Communications Director. Thank you for joining us today for our Charities Focus webinar hosted with our friends at the Cybercrime Support Network. The goal of this webinar is to discuss how officials can effectively communicate to the public, small businesses, and other relevant groups about charities fraud prevention tips and resources in advance of the holiday season and other year-end giving occasions. So that being said, we have a great session planned for you today. So let me run through a quick run of show and ground rules, and then a very brief introduction of today's moderator and presenters. So for the ground rules, you've heard it before, but during the session, please keep your audio muted unless you're speaking. This will help us cut down on background noise and unwanted feedback. Also, please note the session is being recorded. The recording will be put on our website, nass.org, about 48 hours after this webinar concludes. Today, after introductions, we will hear a thoughtful panel discussion moderated by Cindy Liebus, Chief Program Officer for the Cybercrime Support Network, for about 30 minutes or so. The panelists we have for you today are South Carolina Secretary of State Mark Hammond, Beth Short, Director of Outreach and Training in the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Law Section, as well as Vice President of the National Association of State Charity Officials, as well as Tracy Thorlifson, Attorney for the Federal Trade Commission. After this moderated discussion, we will have about 10 minutes of Q&A via the chat function. We will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. So if you hear anything that sparks interest, be sure to put it in. If you hear anything during the moderated Q&A, please put that into the chat. We'd love to hear your real world examples. We just want to make sure this is as collaborative as possible. So now that we've gotten the logistics out of the way, let's get to the fun part. Cindy, I'll turn it over to you for more in-depth introductions as well as the panel discussion. Thanks.
Terrific. We have a great panel here today, as Maria said, and thank you all so much for joining us. In fact, we have quite a few folks who have joined us, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'm Cindy Liebus. I am the Chief Program Officer at the Cybercrime Support Network. I came to the Cybercrime Support Network, which is a public-private nonprofit. I came to CSN after having retired after 35 years with the Federal Trade Commission. I retired as the Regional Director of the Southeast Regional Office of the FTC. Mostly what I did at the FTC was supervise and litigate civil actions against unfair and deceptive actors, and did a lot of outreach to both consumers, business groups, as well as to industry groups to hopefully help people stay safe when they're online and to know tips and what to be aware of when they are online as well as over the phone and in other ways. So thank you very much, and I'll turn this over to our panelists. I'll start with Secretary Mark Hammond from South Carolina. If he could introduce himself and tell the group a little bit more about your work in the charity area, as well as a little bit more about yourself.
Well, thank you, Cindy. I'm Mark Hammond, South Carolina Secretary of State. In South Carolina, the Secretary of State's office is an elected position. And unlike a lot of other states, in South Carolina, I don't oversee elections. So sometimes we find that people aren't as familiar with the Secretary of State's office here as they are in other states. But I can tell you one thing that they're very familiar with is that we enforce the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act. And it's something that we campaign about and talk a lot about. You know, South Carolina ranks in the top 25 when it comes to charitable giving. And that's rather impressive considering there's just over 5 million residents here in South Carolina. So we're a very generous state. So we feel like we need to do everything we can to educate our charitable donors as well as protect our charity donors from charities fraud. And we do that by providing as much information to those donors as we possibly can. We have around 16,000 charities that are registered to solicit in the state of South Carolina, and we have around 1,500 professional fundraisers. And we want people to know who they are and have information available to the public so they can check those organizations out. So we appreciate you letting us participate in this panel discussion, and we look forward to the discussion and any questions anyone may have.
Thank you so much, Secretary Hammond. That's great. And I'll turn it over to Beth Short from the Ohio AG's office.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us to participate today. I'm Beth Short. I'm in the Ohio Attorney General's Charitable Law Section. And in the state of Ohio, charitable registration and professional solicitor registration occurs in the Attorney General's office. And we provide regulatory oversight of the charitable sector, but we don't do it without also working with our friends in the Ohio Secretary of State's office. And I see Allison DeSantis is logged in and a participant, and we talk routinely and share information and resources for folks out there. So we do the kind of enforcement activities involving fraudulent charities, but one of my main focuses is also trying to help good people do good things the right way. And so we spend a considerable amount of time trying to train board leaders and people involved in leadership positions with charities of all sizes. And in the state of Ohio, roughly 47% of them are under $25,000 in assets and revenues. We have 55,000 or more charities that are soliciting in the state of Ohio. So we want to help folks know how to do that work in a way that protects the mission, as well as protecting those really scarce and finite charitable resources that donors have invested under their care to take care of important community needs. So we're involved in doing a lot of different things that we hope get us closer to that point where charities and everyone is just doing everything in the right direction.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And now Tracy, last but not least, Tracy Thorlifson. Tracy and I worked together for over 30 years at the Federal Trade Commission, and just bragging on Tracy, she is the charities guru for the entire agency. So now I'll turn it over to Tracy.
She's the guru. She's the guru also for any of us doing state charity regulation work. So it's always a highlight to be able to do something with Tracy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
So.
Thank you so much. I have been working on taking enforcement actions against sham charities and fraudulent fundraisers, as well as convening the states and the Federal Trade Commission to bring sweeps and other coordinated efforts targeting fundraising fraud for more than 20 years. Most recently, the FTC and 38 states representing 45 state agencies and the District of Columbia joined together to take action against a major fraudulent fundraiser known as Associated Community Services. And I'm happy to report that through this collective action, the fundraisers shut down and the individuals are banned from ever again touching charitable funds or soliciting consumers for charitable donations. But previous to that, I also organized a nationwide sweep that I think it was all 50 states. I can't remember. It was many, many, many states. It was called Donate with Honor, and it focused on fundraising fraud targeting veterans. And that's one of the great roles that the FTC can play. We can convene everyone together, and collectively we can bring a spotlight on that action. And as part of that, we work with the Secretaries of State in those offices where the Secretaries of State work on charities matters, as well as the Attorneys General and some other states where they do charitable work out of different state agencies. So thank you, Cindy, for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I'm going to start with you. Tracy, how do you define, or what is charity fraud or fundraising fraud? And also, what is the scope of the problem?
Well, thanks, Cindy. First off, on the scope of the problem, if you're talking about charity fraud in terms of solicitations that are fraudulent or deceptive, In other words, people give their money thinking that their donation will support a particular cause or program, and it's kept by the fundraiser or by the individuals who run the charity for their own personal profit. The scope of that is really unknown. And it's the first question that reporters have. And it's the hardest to answer because people don't complain about charity fraud, and they don't complain because they don't know they've been scammed. Once you give your money, you make your donation, the transaction for you is complete. And you have no reason to check to make sure that your donation was used as promised. So it's an underreported fraud. I'm going to kick this question to Beth because charity fraud can also be described as fraud affecting charities.
Yes, so I like to say in our office that, we don't have any dead bodies in the area of charitable fraud. If someone pays to have their roof repaired after a hurricane comes through and no one shows up, that person knows that they've been defrauded. Charities, we invest our faith when we entrust funds to those charities. And so fraud happens in for-profit entities, and it happens in nonprofit entities as well. And the National Association of Certified Fraud Examiners releases a report every year about the impact of fraud within, both the charitable and for-profit entities across the country and around the world. And they estimate that as many as, one of the last times I checked, like 8% of revenues may be impacted by some sort of fraud. So we've got that kind where we've just got bad guys who have they're far more interested in taking advantage of the generosity of others who are out there running, fake. They're not even charities sometimes. Sometimes they are dressed up like charities, but they actually achieve no program services. But then we also have the just as heartbreaking situations where we have someone who's a part of a charity who takes assets and takes personal advantage of them. We're dealing with a number of pretty high profile ones in our community in the last couple of weeks. And so when you read headlines about someone who has stolen funds from a charity, embezzlements or other things like that, those often occur when boards have been asleep at the wheel. They don't live up to what their fiduciary duties are in serving in those important roles. So we're trying to address things from that angle, as well as the outright pure bad guys that Tracy has alluded to in some of the multi-state efforts that we've had.
And I assume, Secretary Hammond, you see that too in a small state like South Carolina.
Well, yes, unfortunately, there is quite a bit of charity fraud. And as I said earlier, the best thing that we can do is try to get out and educate the public. And I have investigators who are invited to speaking engagements, as well as I'm invited to service clubs and different speaking engagements. And I enjoy talking about how generous this state is, but I also like to tell charitable donors how they can protect themselves and make sure that their charitable donation is actually going to the cause, to the purpose, and what percentage of that donation is actually going toward the charitable purpose and not being wasted or spent on professional fundraisers. So we have also worked many times with multi-state actions, and we participated in those, and we enjoy doing that. It takes a lot of resources for such a small office that we are, but it has paid great dividends, and I think it's helped protect a lot of charitable donors here in South Carolina. But as far as I can say, concerning fraud, the fraud is out there, and we have to go out and do everything we can to try to educate our charitable donors and work hard to protect those donors.
Well, I've often said with my years at the FTC, it's those multi-state or collaborative actions that really make an impact, because you can do something better together than alone. And oftentimes it really does make a bigger impact and a bigger difference. But educating consumers is also very difficult, because as a consumer, it's often hard to figure out, is this charity legitimate? Is my money going to go where it belongs? Beth, I assume you have resources on your website for setting up a charity, or where consumers can check whether a charity is legitimate. Am I correct?
So that's a loaded question. So let me attack it on a couple of different levels. Our Secretary of State's office has wonderful, wonderful resources that we point people to routinely about how to create a new nonprofit corporation in the state of Ohio. Sometimes when I go to trainings, people will say, well, you know, I've been doing this great community service and someone said I need to go out and create a new charity. And I often feel like I've earned my money for the state of Ohio if I can say, please don't. Let's talk about other things that you can do short of setting up a brand new charity, because many times people are not prepared for the responsibility that goes into running a charitable organization. So if they start off instead working in partnership with other charities through a local church or something like that, it gives them a better chance to decide if it really has legs, as opposed to just running out and setting up a new charity right away. So that's the, you know, how to help people create a new charity. The biggest answer to that is please stop and think before you do. How do we respond to the question, which we do get routinely, which is this charity legitimate? That's a question that we don't answer in those terms when they contact our office with questions. Because just because someone makes filings and they do all their state filings on time with my office, or they do their required 990 filings on time with the IRS, is no guarantee that they're a great group that does wonderful, impactful work. And so that's when we talk about wise giving issues and making sure that you know who you're giving to. My mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, would get routine phone calls from professional solicitors asking for gifts for all kinds of causes that she would write, you know, thankfully just small checks. She didn't have a lot of money. But when you peeled the layers off the onion, they were groups that had very low program service expense ratios, and most of the funds would be used for fundraising and administrative costs. I finally talked her into, before you make a gift, how about you give me a call? And she'd say, well, Beth, they're calling me directly. And I said, Mrs. Besh, I hate to tell you, but you're not special. They'll talk to anyone that breathes. Turns out that's not the greatest thing to say to your mother-in-law, but we did work through an arrangement where she would call and say, can I give to Cops Who Like Other Cops and Children, Inc.? And I'd say, no, let's hold off on that one. Can I give to the Salvation Army? Yes, that one's okay. So we developed that. So we talked to people about developing giving plans where you have time and you're not under pressure to decide what kind of gifts you want to make with your limited resources, making sure that they're going to someone that you know has been helped by this group, or you have personal knowledge about the work they're doing, as opposed to providing bank account and credit card information through telephone calls.
So Beth, can I call you when I have questions about whether I should be donating to a charity?
Yeah, I'll give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. But
Thank you.
Attorney General Yost does not give the official thumbs up or thumbs down on charities. We make them make their own decisions about that.
Well, Tracy,
so-
I know the FTC has some resources for consumers that can at least help them decide whether or not they should be investing or donating money to a charity. Do you want to talk a little bit more about some of the resources?
So we do have a website dedicated to charity fraud, ftc.gov/charity fraud. And I just wanted to harken back to the legitimate charity question. I don't really think it's government's job to decide if a charity is legitimate or not. So one of the tips we have on our website is we suggest that people do a web search for terms like the charity's name and the word scam or fraud or other terms like that, so that they can see if other people have complained about that charity. a tip I would add to that is if it's a telemarketing call and the phone number appeared in your caller ID screen, search for that number and you will find out if they've been robocalling a bunch of people. And on that note, if you get a robocall from a charity, in all likelihood, it's an illegal robocall, and you should ask yourself if you want to donate to a company that is breaking the law in the way that it contacts you. But we also, I think the universal wise giving message is to get information, do your research, have a plan, and just about anywhere, Secretary of State's websites, the FTC website, charity watchdogs, all of us will have some variation on that theme and then provide resources. So I think the best message for everyone is to try to encourage people to research before they give.
Yeah, I think education is such an important thing, and to slow down, do some research, and use Google as a tool is often a great way. I know that we're at CSN often trying to tell consumers and those with whom we work is make sure that you slow down and do your research on a company, whether it's a company that you choose to donate to, or anyone that you're going to do business with. So moving on though, when we have, unfortunately, some charities who may have been suspended or violated a state law, how do you notify the public that there may be a problem, or do you notify the public? Is there a way that I, as a consumer who wants to donate, can find out more information? Beth, I'm going to start with you.
So we do promote through media releases our enforcement actions. They're also, the listing of our enforcement actions is the most commonly read part of our newsletter that we distribute electronically. So people are often eager to look that up. But the other thing that we do also is we will reach out to others, to statewide associations. If we see a problem involving a particular type of organization, we may decide to proactively reach out to others within that category of charitable organization. For instance, I'm guessing Ohio is not alone in having a significant challenge with opioid epidemic issues. We've had some pretty visible cases involving recovery houses. And so with a lot of money being thrown at this problem, trying to find the magic pill to fix this heartbreaking problem. So we've worked with our state department on alcohol and mental health on doing board governance training, reaching out and trying to elevate the level of governance and professionalism within organizations to provide that kind of service to the addicted community. And we'll also do outreach to other government entities who, our office gives grants to charities from funds recovered in a number of our enforcement actions. No one that is not properly registered and not properly doing filings gets any money from our office. And we reach out, and that includes all the other sections as well, the victims of crime and other sections that do funding. They have to pass scrutiny with our section in terms of having not been subjected to enforcement actions, properly registered, doing their filings properly. We also reach out to local county government as well as state government, to their council, and say, hey, before you do contracts or make contributions or grants to charitable organizations, let us check them out for you. We'd be happy to take a look to make sure that, number one, they're compliant with their filing requirements, but also that they haven't been the focus of a particular investigation that we might have undertaken. So having public funds flowing to problematic charities kind of is a double problem, and kind of want to cut the losses as we can in multiple ways.
Oh, that's great. Secretary Hammond, is it similar in South Carolina? Are you able to share information with other states or within the state itself?
We're glad to share information with other states, and We also ask other states and other agencies to give us lists. We try to work closely with the IRS, and I think a lot of states have maybe a Giving Tuesday, and usually before that campaign, we try to get a list of those organizations. And before that campaign begins, we want to make sure that all those organizations are in compliance. As well as in the state, we work with the United Way, and a portion can be deducted from employees' paychecks. And we ask the Department of Administration to give us that list, because we want to make sure all those that employees may want to donate are in good standing and in compliance with the Solicitation of Charitable Funds Act here in South Carolina. Now, we publish our suspended charities on our website, and it's there for anyone to view. We also go back periodically and check that suspended list, look on Google to see if we can find a website to see if they still may be soliciting, even though that they are suspended. And we also, if anyone was to call and say that they had received a solicitation from this organization, then we would take action and send out a notice. We also do everything we can, if we do take an action against a organization, to publicize that. We send out press releases, and one of the best press releases and follow-ups that we've had recently is with the FTC and the Cancer Fund of America. And my goodness, that took way too long, but eventually it was settled, assets were sold, and money was divided, and $30,000 of that come to South Carolina. It was awarded to the Medical University of South Carolina, the Hollins Cancer Center, and we went down and conducted a press conference that received a lot of media attention and talked about that, you know, people need to be aware of these organizations and how rare it is for us to actually be able to get revenue back and hopefully send it to a cause, or the money go to where it was first meant to go to. I just wanted to touch on this quickly too, in case I miss it, but as far as the South Carolina Secretary of State's office, when it comes to educating our charitable donors, we encourage people to go to our website, which is sos.sc.gov. And since we register charitable organizations, they also send their 990 to the Secretary of State's office. So we have all that information. We have a charity search in our system that charitable donors can go to. And instead of searching through a 990, we do that work for them. So they can go to the website, do a charity search, make sure they're registered, and we will give them total revenue, program expense, net assets of the organization, as well as what I added years ago that I think has been very helpful. We list fundraising expenses. And if you see a tremendous amount of money spent on fundraising, then that's definitely an organization you should take a closer look at. And what we also do, other than like Ohio, you know, say whether it's legit or not legit, we do put a percentage on the main screen there of the website, and it will tell you what percentage is actually going toward the charitable purpose. And we feel like that has been very helpful for our donors. If you wanted to view the 990 or the annual report, you can do that through a PDF now, and we also provide that to our charitable donors. So those are some things we're doing here in South Carolina.
Oh, that sounds great. And for any of the other states who are tuned in today, I don't know if you saw in the chat, Maria said, if you have innovative ways that you share with the other states about suspended charities or problematic charities, you know, that would be great if you would share that. I see that one office regularly receives complaints from volunteer board members alleging governance improprieties, and the boards are volunteer and not particularly sophisticated, and they look to third parties to investigate these cases. I know at the FTC, it's those types of complaints that actually often lead to investigations, whether it be about charitable organizations or fundraising, improper fundraising tactics, but complaints to the FTC, to the states. and using like the Consumer Sentinel database. I'll make a pitch for that. It is a great resource for law enforcement. Tracy, do you share information with, or does the FTC share information with the other states on charities that have been suspended, and give them information on how to watch out for problematic activities?
Well, Cindy, so we don't register charities, so we don't have information about suspensions or not. A quick tip, the IRS has a really easy to use exempt organization search function that will tell you whether a charity is currently holds C3 status, which means that a donation to it is tax deductible. And a link to that is on our website. It's just an easy way to verify that a charity actually does have tax exempt status. But information sharing in general between states and the FTC is critical. And I think a lot of people on this call probably know about it and are part of it, but I run a listserv for state charities regulators and the FTC to participate in. We have about 380 members from every state in the Union, the District of Columbia, and I think Guam and American Samoa, although sometimes that fluctuates. And it's a really active list. People share information, and if it needs to go be private, they'll go offline and learn more. It's a way to learn about suspended charities for sure, potentially problematic bad actors. A few years, like just a couple years ago, there was a guy who was running around incorporating in different states as like American Cancer Society of Kansas or Boys and Girls Club of Michigan. He was taking American Cancer Society of Washington. He was using well-known charity names and just adding the name of state, and he was doing it all over. And messages about that flew around on our listserv, and several states ended up investigating, finding out that the guy had done that in their state, and they took action to dissolve the corporations. So information sharing is critical.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Information sharing, and the more we can share, the more that can be shared, is helpful not only for law enforcement, but to shut them down and to stop the scams from continuing and taking money from individuals. So thank you for all that you do.
Cindy, if I could,
Please.
there was a question that was posted in the chat area about receiving complaints about board governance problems, basically, and about, someone who may serve as a board member and they try repeatedly to get financial information from the executive director, the volunteer treasurer, whoever it might be. That is a bread and butter kind of case we will absolutely take a look at, do an investigation, because it suggests that there's breaches of fiduciary duties going on. And those are huge red flags that can often lead to or be covering up fraud that's already taken place. So we encourage, is in our effort to educate board members about how to do their jobs right. When it seems like someone must be trying and they're not getting anywhere, this is serious stuff, and charities cannot operate in this way. And so we use our regulatory enforcement to take a look at these cases. We may investigate, we may provide technical support to get them to where they should be operating safely in the future. We may have to file suit. We may file suit to recover inappropriately spent funds, to remove certain people from a group, or we may even file to close down the entire charity. So just as much as I don't want to chomp on, I'm a huge Tracy fan and FTC fan, and absolutely it's hard when we have fraudulent solicitations going on for charitable causes. But when we have board members not living up to their legal obligations, that can be extraordinarily damaging as well, both to that particular charity, but also to the community's level of trust and presumption that there's a level of integrity and accountability that exists in the whole sector. So it hurts everybody. So that is the exact kind of thing that as a charitable regulator, we would want to know about.
So how does someone complain, for example, in
We
Ohio?
will take, you can do it online through our webpage. You can call us. You can email us. We just got one a couple of weeks ago. Someone dropped it off. It was all bent up, copies of checks with a couple of Post-it notes like, these checks should not have been written to this person. And so we'll take the information any way we can get it. So then we have a staff of investigators, forensic accountants, of lawyers, compliance examiners, and we have the statutory authority to do investigations and then take enforcement actions when we find situations that are problematic.
Secretary Hammond, is that the same in South Carolina, or is that something that you do regulate in your office?
No, South Carolina would be a little different. If it's concerning a criminal act or a charitable trust or governance, all that would be forwarded to the Attorney General's office here in South Carolina. And we do get those complaints, and we're, as you said, we'll take any complaint that we get, and we're glad to forward that over to the Attorney General's office. I guess you could say our part of enforcing the act is more civil, and what would occur here in South Carolina if we found someone that was soliciting that was not registered, then we would send them a notice of violation. And they have 15 days to comply, which we think is very generous. And so giving them 15 days, I think it makes it harder on that organization to explain why they're not registering. But they get that grace period. Say if they do not register in the 15 days or contact us, then we can issue a $2,000 fine. Just for example, if your calendar year is January to December, your annual report or 990 should be filed in the Secretary of State's office by May 15th. If it's late, then we charge $10 a day for that being late, up to $2,000, And just to give you an example, last year it was the largest amount that we collected. We collected $400,000 in fines from charitable organizations. And it's a two-edged sword, because I'd much rather that money go to help those in need or go to the services. But that's the only accountability that we have to hold these organizations to. As far as complaints, what has been successful in South Carolina, a few years ago, we introduced a confidential complaint line on our website, and we received about 103 confidential complaints. Now, all those may not be involved charities, not all, but still we offer that service. We go through every complaint, and if it's someone in violation, then we send them a notice and follow up and hold those organizations accountable. But that's been very beneficial to the Secretary of State's office also.
Do you have a similar complaint line where consumers can complain or folks can complain?
We take 24 hours a day. You can complain to us, and we will take it. We take each complaint seriously. Now, sometimes we get complaints like, they were not very nice to me when I went in to visit this charity last week, and that gets a far different level of examination than one that says, I'm on the board, they refuse to provide me with financial information. So, our goal is to get people operating in the way that they should. And frankly, I think we are very generous in the amount of help we're willing to give folks, just like it sounds like the Secretary says, you can cure this problem if you respond back to us in within a time frame. So I have a little sympathy for those that, blow us off and refuse to respond and then find themselves in hotter water. So, it's all for the integrity of the entire sector and protecting the trust that communities have in the important work that's going on, among the thousands of charities that operate wherever you are.
Well, thank you, True. And Tracy, I'll throw that to you and talk about, do consumers complain about charities and fraudulent fundraisers to the FTC, and how can they complain?
Consumers do not complain. As I mentioned, it's a underreported fraud. I wish they would. And if they wanted to, they could report fraud at ftc.gov or consumer.gov or report fraud. There's any numbers of ways you can find us, but ftc.gov, there's a complaint button in the top corner of the website. And we appreciate that. We love to hear from former employees. People do complain about unwanted calls, and it does not help if somebody says, I got a robocall and it was annoying. We need just a little bit more information, like what was the phone number? Do you remember the name of the charity or the fundraiser? So I think training consumers to be as specific as possible in their complaints would be an asset for everybody.
Yes, but I will make a pitch for the Consumer Sentinel database, as I was talking about before. It's that database where consumer complaints, not only that are directly lodged with the FTC, but also from attorneys generals, from Secretary of State's offices, from the Better Business Bureau, and other places are all housed. And for those of you who are able to bring law enforcement actions, it is a great place. So if you do not use Consumer Sentinel, I encourage all of you to do so, because it is another good sharing mechanism for everyone to share that information. I think we do have some questions. Maria, if you want to share those, and we can start with questions. And then before we conclude, I have a few follow-up questions for our panel.
Yeah, so as Cindy said, now begins our Q&A portion of the panel. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. We have someone already putting in one from North Carolina Secretary of State's office, Gail. So the questions for Secretary Hammond. Do you have and if you have mute, if you are not a panelist, please go ahead and mute yourself. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. All right, Secretary Hammond, do you have a grace period or extension for charities to file after their May 15th filing date, for example? We're running into a problem with our extensions conflicting with IRS extension dates for charities to file their Form 990s.
We do have extension, and if they file 990 and ask for an IRS extension, if they notify us, we accept that and we extend the filing period. I think it's 6 months, and then maybe you can ask for one more extension after that, but we do grant extensions.
Great. Cindy, do you have a follow-up?
Anybody have any other questions from the audience?
Yep, we have another one.
I'm sorry, I could add it, but even if we have the extension, you still have to pay the $50 to register to solicit, though. So you may not have the extension for the annual report 990, but even if you do not have, if you file extension, you still have to pay the $50 to register to be able to solicit. And one other thing that I believe has been very helpful for the Secretary of State's office here in South Carolina is when I took office, say you had your calendar year from January to June. Well, you had to file before November 15th. And then before the next July, you had to remember to register to solicit. We made that, we coincided that. So now you know if your annual report's due, also you have to register to solicit. All of it's due at the same time now.
Makes sense. Our next question doesn't say for who, so anybody feel free to tackle it. What guidance do you give citizens regarding charitable campaigns online like GoFundMe's or fraudulent lookalikes?
Here at the FTC, we have some guidance specifically about donating to crowdfunding sites or through online fundraising platforms. In general, we try to remind people that donations to individuals are not tax deductible. And we also encourage people to complain directly to the platform if they think they have donated to a fraudulent campaign on a GoFundMe, which really does have robust internal security controls. So they should complain both to the platform and to the FTC. In terms of online donating in general, people need to be aware that it is likely that the online platform will be funneling their money through a third-party charity, so that their charitable receipt may not be from the charity that they directed their money to. They need to make sure that the third-party intermediary isn't charging them fees. And they also need to understand how long it might take for their donation to get to their charity of choice, because some of these intermediaries may hold the money for 30 or 45 days, or they may wait until donations collectively reach a certain amount before passing on the money. So if you're donating 20 bucks and their limit is 100, your charity of choice might not get the money for a while. So there are things that consumers need to be aware of when they try to take advantage of the convenience of online platforms.
I also think that this sort of thing is the biggest challenge that is out there right now for charitable regulators and will continue to be. It's no surprise that statutory provisions are always a bit behind, sometimes significantly behind technological advancements. And so this whole, online fundraising world didn't even exist the last time our solicitation statutes were updated by the General Assembly. And so working with both donors and with the charities themselves in ensuring that they are well aware of how these situations operate and that they're extending, due care and diligence in selecting platforms to use and work with and how they work. In the state of Ohio, for instance, you have to have written permission in advance from a charity to raise funds on their behalf. So someone setting up their own individual GoFundMe account to raise money for the Diabetes Association, there should be little surprise that sometimes is a type of fraud that occurs, and that here it turns out that the Diabetes Association or the Children's Hospital never heard of this person, certainly never received any money as a result of pledges that were made. So there are all kinds of questions and challenges that arise in the whole technology field and the various ways it can be used to raise funds and transfer value as well, and that's not even talking about cyber currencies or, buying FTP tokens, which some of our more advanced charities and those with a technological spin are looking at these days. We had our national conference a couple weeks ago, and Chief Legal Counsel from St. Jude's is talking about raising money through space flights. Most of the charities we deal with are never going to be doing fundraising campaigns connected with one of the earliest blast-offs into space. But they run into these issues involving cyber currency and FTPs and other things that are just like a foreign language to many of us. So I think it's a challenge for those of us in the regulatory field to become aware, to be able to advise people about what the risks might be, so that and also the various registration issues that might also come up, and be involved in trying to decide who needs to do filings, who doesn't.
I just want to throw in here that I think that we shouldn't ever lose sight of why registration is important. And that's because you all, the states, are in charge with protecting charitable assets for the use of charity. And in order to do that, you have to know about them. And if there are new ways of seeking charitable donations that are invisible to regulation, then you can't regulate them and you can't protect that money. And at the end of the day, we all want money donated to charity to be used for the charitable good. And when it's not just, you know, our money was stolen from us. It was stolen from legitimate charities. It was stolen from the people that the money was intended to benefit, and it was stolen from society as a whole. So registration and this kind of regulation is critical to that. And it's not just paper pushing. So I want to be clear that y'all in the Secretaries of State world are doing a great thing.
I can't tell you how many
Agreed.
cases where the contact information for people connected with charities not been available on the 990. It's not been easy to track people down, but for the information provided in these annual filings. So the other thing I'd like to think is that it provides kind of a prophylactic uh, reminder of, you know, you're doing this because you are part of this regulated, important, and even holy sector that's supposed to be committed to doing good work. So it's a chance every year also for them to opt in saying, count me in, I agree, and I take it seriously, in addition to the valuable information that takes place.
Well, thank you. So we have time for about 2 more questions with short answers. I want to be conscious of everyone's time today before we conclude. So the next to last question is, have any states taken a position whether a charity needs to obtain a solicitation license if it's located in an outside state, but soliciting contributions over the internet in the home state?
In South Carolina, if you're soliciting in the state, whether you're out of state or not, you still are required to register here in the state of South Carolina. And I also wanted to say this as far as being the regulator of charities here in South Carolina. I don't want to work against the nonprofit community. I want to work with the nonprofit community, and I can't speak for other states, but I feel like here in South Carolina, they want to be regulated because they know as well as all of us, we know that it just takes a couple of bad actors to ruin it for everybody. So they are glad to have a watchdog. They're glad to have someone out there that is trying to hold these organizations accountable, because that gives people more confidence to give, and they want to give. And one thing that we have done probably 24 or 5 years now is announce an angel list. It was Angel and Scrooge list, but each year we recognize 10 wonderful organizations in South Carolina that we start at 80% or above going toward their charitable purpose. We only recognize you one time because we have so many angels here in South Carolina. So if you're not recognized the second year, you're not a fallen angel. You're still an angel. But we have so many, we try to do that once a year. And I think the nonprofit community really likes that recognition. They're proud of that recognition. And it also garnishes a lot of attention to help us fight charities fraud.
That's excellent.
I'll also point out in Ohio, we have a charitable advisory council, which was created by the General Assembly through administrative rule. Maybe 20 years ago, 18 to 20 years ago, kind of as punishment for a set of proposed rules that an attorney general at the time released that people were not happy with. It has turned out to be a huge blessing. Members of our advisory council come from our statewide association of nonprofit organizations, from the statewide foundations group, from representatives in all kinds of sectors around the state, and they've become real partners. They have become supporters and advocates for the work that we do in charitable regulation and filings. And they do, you know, when they speak out and tell the General Assembly that they're supportive of a particular rule change we're seeking, that they want regulation in the state to help the good charities to protect from the bad ones, that carries a message that is stronger than any elected official can carry to lawmakers. So that has been a great blessing, and people can always pull together cheerleaders to help because it's not hard to find folks that, you know, are committed to the success of charities doing important work in your communities.
Okay, last question, and then I'll turn it over to Cindy for any closing thoughts, and then I'll adjourn. So, How are you addressing issues with charities that have been expired for an extended period of time while working with limited staff and resources outside of penalties?
I'm not sure what they're asking about, the details of that, but if you fail to register in Ohio for an extended period of time, you're going to get, we're going to insist that you file the appropriate closing documents with us, with the Secretary of State's office and the IRS, because we don't want to leave abandoned charitable entities out there that others can come in and capture and misuse. And we're going to be very interested on what happened to any leftover funds when they shut down. We want to make sure that it wasn't just passed around the table to the board members that happened to, you know, it's not last one out, turn out the lights. Like, those charitable resources remain charitable resources to the end. And we have taken actions, regulatory actions against groups for not going out of business the proper way and ensuring the ongoing protection of charitable resources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we have like 3 minutes left. So in our final 3 minutes, I'll turn it over to the wonderful panelists. First, to thank you all for being here, but also just if each of you could share some initiatives that you have or some tips that you've developed that you could share with the rest of those who are in attendance, many of whom also are secretaries of state or attorneys general who are working in the this area, and that you might share to help them develop new initiatives. And I'll start with Tracy.
I'll be brief because most of what we do is non-public. I want to give a shout out to the Secretaries of State that have websites that put up all of their documents, because we use your materials in our law enforcement investigations. You know, one particular highlight is the North Carolina Secretary of State's website, which I use all the time. So thank you, thank you. The other thing I want to remind people is that registration enforcement actions are a great history when we go to take action against other companies, to go against the bad guy later, because it shows a history of ignoring the law, and it will form the basis for getting a complete ban against the individuals or the companies. So your actions matter.
And
Secretary, I'll jump in, and save the secretary for last, the grandest for last. So we are early next year going to unveil Charitable University, and it will be a series of webinars that will deal with board governance, with policy development, fundraising, legal compliance. And if folks complete one out of every column, then they will be a proud graduate of Charitable University, and that will be a requirement for organizations to get funds from our office. And then we'll see how that goes, and then we'd like to spin it out to foundations, to school districts, could require their PTOs and their booster groups to complete it each year as a condition of being a recognized school group. So we're hoping to, again, help good people do good things the right way to help reduce one part of the fraud formula out there. So keep your fingers crossed for us.
Oh, that sounds terrific. And last but not least, Secretary Hammond.
We have a saying here in South Carolina: give from the heart, but give smart. And we want to continue to, again, do what we can to educate our charitable donors, make sure that they know that we're a resource that they can use. We have a toll-free 1-800 number that they can call. Also our website, and like I said, a confidential complaint. We're going to continue to travel the state and try to educate the donors and tell them to make sure that their charitable contribution is going to the purpose and to the charitable cause that it's supposed to go to, and not to pay for fundraising and other expenses. That's to be aware of that, and to look at each organization and make sure they're getting the best bang for their buck. But thank you for letting us participate in this panel discussion. And if anyone has any questions, we publish our WISE giving report each year for the public to view, and Also, if anyone would be interested, we have a brochure and it has questions that you should ask. And one of the big questions is, where are you located? And if you are a professional fundraiser, and by law, they have to answer those questions. You have to identify yourself as a professional fundraiser. And I tell people, if they say they're a professional fundraiser, ask what percentage goes to the charitable cause. And if they say 100%, red flag.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all. Thanks to this wonderful panel, and thanks to all of you who have joined us today. And thank you very much, Maria.
And thank you, Cindy, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. We're so excited to have had a charities webinar. It was a wonderful discussion, and unfortunately, that's all the time we have. But if you have any additional questions for any of our panelists, please contact me. My email address is in the chat. We really appreciate you taking the time today, and we look forward to continuing this discussion in the future.